The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, although that sounded a bit more like a question. Yes, I would like to add a few comments before the close of debate today on Bill C-18. The Rouge Valley National Park Act is extremely important, and it has given us an opportunity to have a discussion about the larger purposes of national parks in Canada. I want to begin, Madam Speaker, by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin of Golden Lake. I think that's an important aspect of what we're doing here with the Rouge Valley National Park, is reconnecting with the First Nations peoples and their traditions and use and occupation of the territory that was here before there was a Canada. It's important that as we reflect on the purposes of national parks, we not fall into what I have found frustrating in the debate on C-18, which is something of a false debate about what is the purpose of a national park and why are we worried about ecological integrity. Ecological integrity is at the heart of the reason we create parks. We do not create national parks in this country to create amusement park areas or primarily for the purpose of giving Canadians and foreign visitors a chance to walk in the woods. That's a wonderful side effect of creating a national park. The reason, the fundamental purpose of a national park as the highest order of protection within the International Union of Conservation of Nature protected areas hierarchies, the crown jewel in every country will be those national parks, which, unlike provincial parks, are more restrictive in what you can do. Yes, I enjoy hiking in national parks, but I know that most areas you're not, some areas you're not to take a dog at all, and in no place you're to take your dog off a leash. Provincial parks are different. In no place in Canada should we compromise on the fundamental principle of ecological integrity in order to encourage economic development. Now, there was a bit of a slippery slope some time ago, and back in 1998, the federal government commissioned a panel on ecological integrity. It was chaired by the former Deputy Minister of Environment Canada, Jacques Gérin, and a very respected civil servant that I am proud to call one of my dear friends. Jacques Gérin, as Deputy Minister of Environment Canada, had the misfortune for a while of being Deputy Minister to the one Minister of Environment in the history of this country who truly did not understand the purposes of a national park. This was in the Mulroney administration. Her name, some of you may recall, Suzanne Blais-Grenier, was the only Minister of the Environment who ever said out loud, "Gee, it's a shame, why can't we mine and log in our national parks? That seems like a lost opportunity." Her time working within the Mulroney cabinet was brief. Fortunately, the Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, did not appreciate having a Minister of Environment musing about clear-cut logging in national parks, or why aren't we mining, or why aren't we damming. She was shuffled out of cabinet, and the person I came to work for sometime later, the Honourable Tom McMillan, replaced her. And it was a moment where people began to sort of rock back on your heels and say, wait a minute, we could actually have a minister in a cabinet, a Minister of Environment, who doesn't understand that the purpose of national parks is to protect these areas from development. We have a vast area of this country outside of all protection. It's very clear that most of Canada is not protected. So when we do say this is a national park, we have to understand the purpose of that park. That purpose was clarified way back when by this panel created on ecological integrity back in 1998 that reported that ecological integrity must not be ignored. It must be fundamental. C'est l'enjeu primordial.
It's the primordial issue for the creation of national parks.
National Parks Act was amended to ensure that ecological integrity stayed there as the paramount purpose of national parks. Frankly, this was being eroded over the 10 years of the Harper administration. We saw an ice walkway, a private for-profit company put an ice walkway in Jasper National Park. Yes, it's a great tourist attraction, but no, it did not contribute to the ecological integrity of Jasper National Park. Neither did it contribute to the ecological integrity of Cape Breton Highlands National Park when the previous administration was promoting the horrific idea, which thankfully this Minister of Environment and Climate Change has seen, the end of the notion of a Mother Canada statue in Green Cove in a pristine area of the coastline of the Cape Breton Highlands National Park. development and tourist attractions of that type are completely inappropriate for our national parks. So the debate on C-18 has given us a chance, and I wanted to, in closing this debate at third reading, reaffirm national parks are about ecological integrity. That's why we have to go back and look at the Sable Island National Parks Act, passed in the 41st Parliament, which still lamentably allows the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board to have superior regulatory authority within the national park than Parks Canada itself. The CNSOPB is allowed to order seismic testing, and they merely notify Parks Canada. They don't even have to consult in advance. That National Park Act, like the Rouge Valley National Park Act, needs to be revisited and ecological integrity restored as the core purpose of creating that park. The Rouge Valley National Park, and there have been some red herrings in this debate about forest fires burning out of control, that is not what's going to. Ecological integrity in every instance relates to the ecosystem you are protecting. The Carolinian forest is, with the exception of the Garry Oak forest type of southern Vancouver Island, the Carolinian forest is the most endangered forest type in Canada. Unlike Canada's boreal forest, the Carolinian forest is not a fire-driven ecosystem. It does not need, for ecological purposes, fires to burn through it. It is a moist forest. It's a hardwood forest. It has 70 different species of trees, far more biologically diverse than the boreal, for example. It has over 400 bird species. It has marshlands, and we are losing our wetlands at an extraordinarily fast rate, particularly in southern Canada. So the opportunity we have here, and the opportunity we have today, despite the concerns which I acknowledge is valid, from environmental lawyer like John Swagan, from the Friends of the Rouge, who would still like to see changes made. This is a point where we can't make changes. We might revisit in a number of years, but right now we need to reassert that while 75% of the Rouge Valley National Park is still in its wild state, 25% is disturbed, but Parks Canada can have a plan and a vision, and Canadians can support it, to restore more of the marshlands, restore more of the Carolinian forest, ensure that in this time of climate change we provide as much of a corridor as possible for those species that are moving further north as climate changes, to have a habitat to find as they go north. We need the Rouge Valley National Park. We need it whether it's an urban park or a wild park. It is the Rouge Valley National Urban Park Act that we debate today, that we put to bed today at third reading. I support it. I'm grateful for it, and I'm very grateful to my colleagues for giving me this abbreviated time. I didn't need to take my full 10 minutes, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to reassert parks are about ecological integrity, full stop. That's why we create them. That's why we must protect the concept, the principle, and the foundational purpose of our national park system: protect the ecological integrity of Canada's diverse ecosystems. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Saanich, Gulf Island, for her continued care for the environment, which has been there for many, many years. Of course, we're working right now on a study on the Aichi targets, trying to get Canada's land protected from 10% to 17%, and our marine area from 1% to 10% by 2020, which is pretty ambitious targets. But many of the witnesses we heard from suggested in the long run, Canada should be looking at 50% of the land and 30% of marine areas protected in some form in Canada. And I'd be interested in the members' views on the future for conservation and protection in Canada.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I thank my colleague from Kootenay, Columbia, who himself has had a long career and track record, particularly with our park systems. The targets are important, but targets can be misleading. One of the things that happened out of the Brundtland Commission was a mistake, and the World Commission on Environment Development, and certainly the author of the Brundtland Commission report, Jim McNeil, lamented that somehow people took out of that report 12%. There was sort of a magic number. If you can protect that, then everything else will take care of itself. Ideally, you have graduated systems of protection. You know that your national park, as I mentioned, is the crown jewel, so no industrial activity at all should take place within national parks, and we should avoid the notion that they're a cash cow to pay for Parks Canada. As my colleague from Kootenay, Columbia mentioned earlier, Parks Canada should be adequately funded so the agency doesn't have to rely for so much of its revenue stream on people paying for services, and that does tend to drive you in the direction of natural parks Disneyland. We need to avoid that. But as you go out across the landscape, farmers, we know, are great conservationists. Ranchers can be great conservationists. And knowing how to protect things, like lamenting deeply that the Harper administration killed the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act, losing hedgerows, losing tall grass prairie. All parts of our ecosystems can be protected through sustainable development and sensitive use, even when you're exploiting them for economic purposes.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And my colleague, I just perhaps can. We've been going back and forth on this, I guess, for a while now, on the term ecological integrity. If she can allay some of my fears, because the definition that I have, ecological integrity means that we allow processes such as wildfires, flooding, pest outbreaks, they need to be allowed to run their natural course. And that's the definition that I've been using. And if she could explain to me how that definition is acceptable inside of an urban setting, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, ecological integrity refers to, there's three core elements. It's preserving and protecting natural biodiversity, that is the range and numbers of species, the natural processes, which his question relates to, as well as any limiting unnatural stressors. In the context of wildfires, Parks Canada has never let a wildfire burn in any park if there is human habitation nearby. So that's a limit. It's a natural limit. It makes sense. And as I mentioned before, the Carolinian forest, fires are not a natural stressor. You can have, of course, fires do occur in any place in Canada, but they're not part of the natural ecosystem type known as the Carolinian forest, as opposed to boreal, which clearly is a fire-driven ecosystem. Replenishment, rebirth, new forests happen in the boreal through fire. But even in the boreal forest, Parks Canada would not allow a boreal forest fire to burn out of control and threaten a community. So there's common sense limits to this, and Parks Canada has always applied them.